Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today we're looking at the 1985 series, Secret Wars 2. Whether you liked the first Secret Wars or not, it certainly sold comics. In fact, it sold so well that a sequel should have been seen as basically inevitable. And why not? Who wouldn't want more of the heroes and villains across multiple different titles being thrown together for some cosmic event with immense possible ramifications for the entire Marvel Universe? Unfortunately, that's not a sequel we ever got. Not Secret Wars 2, not even the 2015 Secret Wars from Jonathan Hickman, which also really just kind of steals the name for a basically entirely different and unrelated story, but oh well. Instead, Secret Wars 2 focuses entirely on the Beyonder, that mysterious entity that kicked off everything for the first story. If you recall from my last video, various heroes and villains from across the Marvel Universe were pulled together into two different teams to a newly formed planet called Battleworld by a being that introduced itself as being from Beyond. This Beyonder offered them their heart's desires if only they would fight and kill the opposing team. That didn't work out because Doom, being the ultimate villain that he is, managed to steal the Beyonder's power for himself. The heroes, not trusting him with the power, were able, with a little help from the weakened remains of the Beyonder, to steal those powers away from Doom and return them to the Beyonder, who then vanished, not to be seen again. Until now. Secret Wars 2 will see the Beyonder come to Earth instead of bringing everyone to him, so there's no real secret here, and there's certainly no wars, so I don't know why they kept the name, but, you know, I didn't name it, don't be mad at me. Or do be mad at me, I guess, I don't really care. Either way, this comic will take us through all the madness, chaos, destruction, and creation that comes along with the being of nearly endless power and infinite curiosity, bringing itself to Earth to learn our ways. So, let's see just how insane that gets, and it'll get insane, and take this away. The comic opens on space! Again! And already, I like the art less. It's not just me, right? Like, this is a legitimately less cool interpretation of space, even though it's kind of similar. But beyond that, or maybe I should say beyonder that, most of the art in this series just looks kinda crappy, and I don't think it's Al Milgrom who takes over art duties for this series, or at least not entirely. You can see some of the inked pages in the back of the collected edition, and I feel like these actually look really good. So I guess it could be Christy Shields coloring, but I feel like it's more related to the printing. The 80s was seeing changes to the way comic book coloring was being done, and this book could be suffering from that, or possibly suffering from a digital reprint that didn't try to faithfully reproduce the coloring and instead just use the original color separations that were intended to be printed on non-white paper, and certainly not released digitally. So quite honestly, these images grabbed from a digital copy might not be doing justice to the original coloring work and the overall look of the original comic. Anyway, as you can see, we're watching a being of immense power, who we'll very quickly learn is the Beyonder, coming down to Earth and visiting our old pal Molecule Man, aka Owen Reese, and his lady love Volcana, or Marsha Rosenberg. The two had fallen for each other over the course of the previous story, which, I guess I kind of forgot to mention in my previous review, sorry. And after returning to Earth, they started living a normal life together, which, from what I can tell, means they pretty much just sit around and watch sitcoms. Their lives must be hell. The Beyonder attempts to appear human, forming as this hilarious mashup of all the humans it knows. In other words, the characters we met in the first Secret Wars. Someone please do this as a cosplay. I need that in my life. Beyonder demands input from Reese, and the Molecule Man, who takes the Beyonder's arrival with complete calm as though any random neighbor had just happened to stop by, suggests that what the Big B needs is experience, and that he should go to LA because you can experience anything there. I actually do kind of enjoy this suggestion to kick things off. Since Owen and Marsha get most of their life experiences now from television, of course they would send the Beyonder to the place where most television and movies are made, in order for him to watch some experiences for himself. So the Yonder does as he says, running across an award-winning writer there named Stewart. You know he's award-winning because of his lightning bolt-shaped Shazam award. Nice ballsy on the nose reference there, Marvel. Beyonder, wanting to see Stewie fulfill his desires, gives the writer the power to become Thunder Sword. Thunder Stewart then goes on a rampage, attacking NBC Studios for making him write crappy scripts, and McDonald's, McBurgers, that's totally different, attacking them for having cheap, low-quality food, which honestly might be the point of this whole comic I most identify with. He's just like me. Down with McBurgers! Long live the Burger King! Psychic extraordinaire Professor Xavier, leader of the X-Men, detected the Beyonder the second he came to Earth, and sent the X-Men and the New Mutants, along with Magneto, as he's now headmaster of the school, to hunt for the Big B. They find Stewie first, but Iron Man, still the Rhodey version, and Captain America show up to deal with him, managing to stop him by separating him from his lightning bolt. The X-Men, thanks to Rachel, the then current host of the Phoenix, find the Beyonder, though he's currently disguised as the Molecule Man, as Owen had suggested Beyonder take a more subtle form earlier. Wolverine finishes what he started trying to do to the Molecule Man in the previous series, but it has no real effect on the Beyonder. Afraid that Big B is gonna counterattack, Lila Cheney teleports out of there with most of the X-Men. The remaining X-Men and New Mutants had already been removed from the fight when Beyonder, out of curiosity, accidentally brought forward Illyana's demon form, and also reacting in panic, she had teleported herself and a few others away. But not knowing those details, Lila was convinced Beyonder had murdered them, and that's why she reacted the way she did here. Cap attempts to approach the Beyonder, but unsatisfied with just watching another's experience, B decides he needs to seek his own experiences and teleports away. With most of the classic Secret Wars gang here, you might think the idea is that they're gathering forces to proceed with a nationwide manhunt. But with the immediate threat over, everyone will pretty much just ignore that Beyonder is on the planet after this for a long time. Just kind of like, well, we found him, good enough. Bye! From here, Beyonder will next appear in an issue of New Mutants, where he'll garner a lot of information on the human race by psychically connecting with Rachel Summers, and then he'll appear after that in an issue of Captain America, where he'll take a more permanent human form by copying Steve Rogers' body. He'll make a lot of brief appearances in various comics because this is the event story that started attempting to tie in every running comic to the big event story, no matter how much they had to stretch those other comics to actually make them a tie-in. It was such early days that they literally end each issue of this series with basically house ads for every tie-in issue. So if you want a complete list of them, here you go, I guess. This is every tie-in comic. But most of those appearances are super pointless and not really necessary to know about for this story, and others like ROM, Transformers, and Micronauts, which were all further attempts by Marvel to make marketing for toy lines, are practically impossible to get now that Marvel no longer has the licenses for those toys. So I may occasionally mention something that happens in one of the tie-ins, but for the most part we're simply going to ignore them and focus on the main comic. That brings us, in the Beyonder, to New York. Now in his Steve Rogers-inspired human body, he experiences hunger and eating for the first time. Though not understanding how eating works, he eats a glass cola bottle. Later, he'll appear to Spider-Man and ask Spidey about the fullness in his stomach, forcing Spidey to explain how using the bathroom works. Yikes. More yikes is the thought that his stomach content includes, presumably, some glass shards. That hurts to even think about. Beyonder will continue just bouncing around to various people from here, leading him to an unhoused woman, and later to Luke Cage, who both attempt to convince B that the meaning of everything is money, particularly gold. Beyonder will thank Luke and Iron Fist by turning their headquarters into gold because he has the brains of a child. Beyonder will then for the first time experience exhaustion, and this will bring him across a prostitute, who offers her services in exchange for payment. But she ends up fleeing from him when he creates a gold bar out of thin air to pay for those services. Not actually knowing what those services are, but that's besides the point. He still follows her suggestion to go to a very run-down hotel nearby where he gets a room and, not knowing what to do there, simply falls asleep on the floor. He's woken up in the middle of the night by a mob boss named Vinny. It seems that prostitute, apparently named just Toots, classy, went and told her pimp, who is named for one of my favorite reggaeton songs, about this weird chulo she met, and this chulo went and told Vinny about the gold. Quickly realizing that Beyonder is basically a blank slate, Finn takes B under his wing. The mobster teaches Beyonder how to eat properly, which greatly increases Beyonder's enjoyment of the experience. Look at him go all ziggy piggy on that ice cream. They also give him his first sexual experience, which that must have been interesting, and buy him some super baggy 80s clothes that will annoyingly pretty much be his outfit for the rest of the series. He'll also change his hair color to black for unspecified reasons, just prefers it, I guess. Vinny teaches Beyonder, who he refers to as Frank, everything he knows, and Frank in turn provides plenty of free benefits for Vinny, until the mafia boss decides that Frank has grown beyond what Vin can teach him, and tells him to move on. Convinced now that the way of the world is the continuous grasping for more power, Beyonder begins to take over the world one piece at a time, but uses his power to coerce people and force them to obey him, until every person, and every animal, and every living thing, and rock, and whatever, across the entire world is under his power at even the molecular level. Everyone except the Molecule Man, actually, who apparently B can't control. Despite having complete control, even over this song, and living in places surrounded by women that are also completely under his control and still likely having sex with him, a fact with incredibly disturbing implications that will actually happen multiple times in the story and be completely glossed over each time, despite all of this, or maybe because of it, Beyonder does not find himself satisfied. Gee, is the pursuit of wealth and power empty and unfulfilling, Jim Shooter? Please, tell me something else no one's ever said before. After talking to Toots, who apparently moved on with her life without him, he realizes this isn't working and releases everyone from his power. Unsure of what to do next, he takes a look across the world to consider some desires he finds in people. This includes Algrim the Elf, who desires Thor's death after nearly dying himself in battle with the mighty Norse god. And interested in seeing Algrim achieve his dreams, Beyonder revives him and gives him great power, turning him into a new being that will be called Curse, who will then become a recurring villain for Thor. We even saw him in one of my Lady Thor reviews. Sorta. Anyway, we also see the desires of several others, including characters from ROM, The Thing, Captain America, and Ronald Reagan the actor. I mean the president. And it seems pretty generous to say his desires are tax reform in a certain way, but okay. Since the Molecule Man helped him before, Beyonder goes to Owen again and explains his problem with fulfillment. Maybe I should have rephrased that. Owen, thinking about Marcia, suggests that love is the ultimate fulfillment. Again, maybe this is weird wording. So Beyonder goes to a woman he has sort of been seeing, a woman so obsessed with him that she attempted to take her own life when he left her. But Beyonder revives her because he wants to understand her interest in him. What she describes as love, though, sounds to Beyonder like a business transaction, rather than a mutual feeling for each other. So B decides he needs to seek out a true mate. He pulls up a visual list of potential options, and his companion notes that there's male and female choices in there. Beyonder says why not, because after all, he could choose to be male or female if he wanted to, since he didn't start out as either and it doesn't actually matter to him. And yeah, gender is a construct anyway. And if you think blatant political and social messages like this haven't pretty much always been in comics, like this one from 1985, you've definitely intentionally been burying your head in the sand. Also, if you're just wondering why I've specifically been saying he instead of it for the past 2 videos, this is why. Beyonder specifically chooses to identify as male. Beyonder ends up selecting Dazzler as the perfect mate, showing he clearly has good taste in women, and pulls her out of her life and starts propositioning her. And yeah, every woman he meets throughout the entire story will weirdly be instantly attracted to him no matter what he does. Even the Wasp as she's attacking him. Although that Wasp will turn out to be a fake Wasp who's only actually a projection created by the Beyonder, so someone might be a little full of themselves? But even Dazzler isn't immune to those effects, despite the fact that the Beyonder has not only kidnapped her, but is repeatedly teleporting her to new places where they can be alone, removed from everyone and everything she knows. Still, she's like, kinda into it? I'm beginning to think Shooter just has some really creepy ideas of how to romance women. But then again, maybe he's onto something. In the end, Dazzler is less than dazzled by the Beyonder in his weak attempts at charm. When he leaves her at one point to actually get a wedding ring, if you can believe it, she attempts to flee. He tries to appeal to her by giving her half of his power, making her as much of an omnipotent cosmic entity as he is, but she expels the power and falls to her death. Unable to stand the thought of a universe without her, Beyonder resurrects her, this time again using his power of control to force her to love him. But he realizes that it isn't real and that she'll never truly love him, so, as the police say, if you love somebody, set them on fire. I mean, let them go. Sorry, I'm always mixing those songs up. This sends Beyonder into a bit of a depressive slump. We'll next find him walking along railroad tracks and destroying a train just before it hits him. At the last minute, he decides to let all the passengers aboard live and saves their lives. And one of those passengers will turn out to be Tabitha Smith, aka Boom Boom. That's still a terrible name, but she does point out that she actually calls herself Time Bomb, which is such a better name and much more descriptive of her powers. It's a shame that Boom Boom, for some reason, is the name that stuck. This is Boomer's first appearance, and as she explains to the Beyonder, she was running away from an abusive, mutant-hating father and hoping to travel to New York to join a school for mutants up there that she's heard rumors about. Tabby and Beyonder will bond over what rejection feels like, and then he'll take her to the X-Mansion. Once they arrive, though, the X-Men will simply ignore Boom Boom, and instead, they'll all attempt to attack the Beyonder and chase him away. Frustrated, Tabitha slinks off into the woods alone, leading us to the third female character in a row who attempts to, unalive themselves over the Beyonder. This series, man. Beyonder will end up returning and being like, okay, Boomer, that was a little dramatic, and then take her with him into outer space to the home of the Celestials, because they're trying to pull literally all Marvel characters into this story. There, just to prove how powerful he is, Beyonder has all the Celestials attack him at once, leading to a cosmic battle that nearly destroys the Celestials' home. This terrifies Tabitha, and rightly so, and after she convinces Beyonder to return them to Earth, she calls the Avengers to have them come stop this crazy guy. She then leads Beyonder into a trap against them, but dismayed over first Dazzler's betrayal, and now Boom Boom's, Beyonder just gives up, letting the Avengers attack him without fighting back. Captain America, realizing this, decides to stop the attack and simply lets Beyonder go. Remember when we were freaking out that he was here? I guess we're fine with it now? For some reason, Beyonder will wander off and literally get drunk to drown his sorrows, and in what might be the most important side issue, he'll run across Doctor Strange, who will give him new purpose in life by suggesting to him that he become a champion of life. Or in other words, a superhero. The Beyonder, in his typical way of going above and beyond what is necessary, goes all out on this. He builds himself a gigantic superhero HQ and goes around the world, in the universe, resolving essentially every possible problem and danger he comes across. So much so that Captain America and Mr. Fantastic come to visit him, worried that his actions may end up limiting free will. And I guess it kind of does when Beyonder takes Champion of Life to its logical conclusion and decides to kill Death herself. The various major cosmic entities of the universe, because again we have to get everyone involved in this story, show up to try and convince Beyonder to not go through with it. A reporter named Dave, who had sort of ingratiated himself with the Beyonder to become essentially his personal assistant for this hero business, is attacked by Mephisto, Marvel's sort of devil equivalent, in an attempt to convince the Beyonder to stop. This only proves to anger Dave so much that he then demands Death drink the death-destroying elixir that Beyonder created, and so she just does. Molecule Man shows up in a rage, extraordinarily frustrated with how pointless everything is now that nothing can die. There's not even anything to eat since you can't kill plant or animal to consume them. I mean, the Watcher did show up earlier to ask Molecule Man to interfere and stop this from happening in the first place, so it's a little late for him to complain now, but you know, whatever. Horrified by what he's done, Dave begs the Beyonder to restore Death. Even though the Beyonder had just said that this would be impossible, he suggests that he can do it if Dave would sacrifice his life as the first new thing to die, which would then make him the new embodiment of Death. So Beyonder summons all his powers to kill Dave and succeeds at restoring Death to the universe. And it's pretty notable, at least to me, that Marvel's Death presents as female, and Dave was, of course, male, so I guess that means that Marvel's version of Death is canonically trans now. You're welcome, universe. With the whole superhero escapade a failure, Beyonder goes to a deserted tropical island in order to just sit and think and try to figure out what to do next. Unfortunately for him, a sales exec living on a nearby island who quit his job because he's clearly having a midlife crisis runs across Beyonder and is for some reason really interested in Beyonder's plan of just sitting around and thinking. So he invites a bunch of people over to also sit around the Beyonder and think. And before you know it, Beyonder has become an unintentional guru, leading a movement that results in hundreds of people from all over the globe coming to the island to also just think. The best part of this is when Spider-Man is shown learning about it and considers that maybe he should try the thinking method since nothing else seems to be working. Yeah, Spidey, you really should. You really, really should. Meanwhile, Mephisto is busy attempting to kill the Beyonder, to stop him from ever possibly trying to kill Death again. His attempt to do this involves a giant army of supervillains, including some of our only appearances of many of the villains from the first story, as well as the Beyonder's own power that was spent killing Death the first time, and a giant Dr. Seussian machine being charged and aimed by Eternity, the living embodiment of the entire universe. But with so many people bothering the Beyonder, he's considering leaving his island. So to keep him in place so they can aim their weapon at him, Mephisto sends Ben Grimm as a distraction. Ben hates the Beyonder because when he finally returned from Battleworld, he discovered the love of his life, Alicia Masters, apparently sleeping with Johnny Storm. But when the supervillain squad show up to also attack the Beyonder, Ben regains his heroic nature and single-handedly holds them all off, thanks to having been powered up by Mephisto initially. This delays things just long enough for Mephisto's machine to collapse under the power it was attempting to contain. At this point, the Beyonder begins to grow frustrated at his inability to find a purpose to his life. He decides that the best thing is for him to just end the entire universe so he doesn't have to deal with its existence anymore. Molecule Man attempts to talk him out of it, and during their talk we learn some important backstory. During much of the series, the Beyonder talks about how he was everything in the universe he comes from, but then some cosmic event in the Marvel universe opened a hole to the Beyonder's universe. Through that peephole, the Beyonder began to watch the Marvel universe like some kind of cosmic creepo, particularly watching the people of Earth. And that's what inspired him to pull in a bunch of super people for the first Secret Wars, and what introduced him to the concept of desire. For most of the comic, what that cosmic event was that opened this gateway has been left a mystery. Could it have been Rick Jones gaining those cosmic powers in Kree Skrull War? Could it have been the multi-dimensional tampering going on during the Avengers Defenders War? Maybe even the Contest of Champions and bringing back an ancient being of the universe to life. And with him starting then, maybe that inspired Beyonder to do his own contest. No. It was apparently Molecule Man gaining his powers, because Owen's ability to control molecules makes him, in many ways, the most powerful being in the entire universe. The mere act of him developing those powers was enough to send shockwaves through the universe powerful enough to open the interdimensional rift into the Beyonder's realm. This more or less makes Owen the Beyonder's father, which honestly is the thing that really puts this comic in perspective. The entire series really is the lifespan of the Beyonder. He comes to Earth and is born, just a blank slate conglomeration of those who came before. Then he begins to learn things and becomes a toddler, and then enters schooling for the first time, seeing the world and all possibilities as his to obtain. Next, he becomes a preteen and falls in love for the first time, then a full-on teenager with all the brooding and disappointment in the world that entails. Then he becomes a young adult, setting out to see the world and make his name in it. Over time, he moves into what we would see as probably the 30s or so, growing disillusioned and less impressed by the world. Then he has a bit of a midlife crisis, no longer sure of his purpose in the world or what he should be doing with himself. Finally, he starts to get old and begins to become obsessed with mortality, which is where we move next. After deciding not to destroy the universe and everything in it, the Beyonder instead decides to try to become actually mortal to understand people's obsession with mortality. He does this by building another weird Seussian machine, this one designed to give birth to a body composed of him, essentially, but without his powers, because he stored those in a giant bottle. Upon being born, again. He is immediately horrified at the prospect of mortality and takes his power back. But once he does, he's fascinated by the results and has himself give birth to another mortal body. This time, Mephisto shows up to mess with him, but is unable to stop the Beyonder from gaining his powers back, and Mephisto vanishes the instant he does. B decides he needs to try this once more, but this time having himself be born in such a way that he'll keep most of his power, just not be quite omnipotent. However, by this point, all the heroes of the world, and the Molecule Man, have gathered together, finally having had enough of the Beyonder, and they decide they're going to defeat him for real this time. No takesy backsies. They interrupt him before he's able to be reborn again, and an extraordinarily explosive fight ensues, primarily between Molecule Man and Beyonder, though everyone else is kind of doing stuff, probably. Beyonder wins the struggle, because of course he does, with a blast so powerful that it rips a destructive path across the entire universe. With the heroes out of the way, Beyonder steps into his machine to once again be reborn, but it will turn out that Molecule Man, having not quite the heroic nature of everyone else, had turned his power toward defending himself and everyone else instead of attacking right at the last minute, and saved all life from the path of the shockwave. So they return to the machine to find the Beyonder now as a baby, and some of the heroes have their doubts about whether they should kill him in this stage. But Molecule Man has no doubts, because he must be a modern day Democrat, right guys? Okay. And blast the defenseless baby Beyonder. Bonder? While the heroes are distracted fighting each other. Destroying this baby imbued with most of the Beyonder's energy causes it to explode, sending out enough energy to wipe out all of existence. Only, again, Molecule Man saves everyone, funneling all that power back into the Beyonder's home dimension, which without the Beyonder is just an endless white void. That power then explodes with such energy that it serves as a big bang that then cools down into suns and planets, and on one such planet, life forms, seemingly indicating that the Beyonder and Molecule Man created our universe, and not Superman like Grant Morrison wanted us to believe. And that, as weird as it may seem, is where the comic ends, so we need to get to the breakdown. I don't believe I've ever said this before, and I've read John Dies at the end, but, what the fuck did I just read? What? Huh? What? And most importantly, why? Wow. People talk about the first Secret Wars being a mess, but this is... wow. I guess Shooter felt the need to prove himself after the criticisms of the first story by writing a deeper, more philosophical book. But his solution for how to do that was mostly to just have the Beyonder wander around like an idiot asking childish questions about the meaning of life? Or literally just sitting around and thinking about it? That was an exciting issue. And whenever it almost seemed like maybe the story might be getting to a point or going somewhere or actually having some philosophical thought, it was immediately interrupted, either because this was actually just set up to move into one of the tie-in titles, or by random superhero nonsense. Everyone was constantly acting super aggressively, or super love-stricken, in the Beyonder's presence with no real reason for doing so. I guess there's some depth added to it by more or less dividing the issues up into phases of life, but even that would work better if Shooter didn't so strongly feel the need to point out what he was doing by having a character show up to basically state the obvious. He had Spidey literally potty train him as a toddler, he had Vin be a teacher to him as a child, he had a literal teenager hang out with him for the teenage stage, and he adopted some of her personality traits, he had a man with a midlife crisis lead him into his own midlife crisis. Yes, thank you. We got it. I guess I do a little bit enjoy the fact that Molecule Man is basically his father, and he both literally brought him into this world and took him out of it. And overall, maybe this just would generally be better if I actually could enjoy the art half as much as I did from the first series, but man, I really am not feeling the art here. And maybe that's just a printing thing, but I don't know. It's definitely hurt if you're actually reading through the tie-ins as you go along, because you're jumping to comics that actually have some fantastic art, like the Dazzler issue. And after reading that, it's really hard to come back to this series. So overall, I'm giving this series a recommendation level of low. I'm sure there's some people who could enjoy the general humor or philosophizing of this series, but overall it really doesn't do much with its source material or add much of importance to the Marvel Universe. The collected edition gets 1 Shazam Award, which is maybe not as good as it might sound. It's probably not even made of real lightning. So yeah, it contains all 9 issues of the story, plus some of the actual original house ads for the tie-ins, a few inked pages as I mentioned, and the comic-style introduction to the Omnibus edition done by Al Milgrom himself. But that's really it. And yes, there's also an Omnibus edition, but I'm not reviewing that version. I can't afford an Omnibus edition. Have you seen how much those things cost? Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed whatever this was. Boy, was this a comic that existed at a point in space. Please definitely leave your thoughts in the comments below, because despite not loving this series myself, I do think it's worth discussing for its uniqueness, I guess, if nothing else. We got more Marvel coming for ya. Hopefully that'll include Galactic Storm if I can get to it as you guys requested. So if you're excited for that, or you like this video, or if you've been taken control of by something from beyond, then please be sure to like and subscribe and all those things so you can be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.